This is going to be a fun project, looking at and exploring mixed media. I've got some inks with a few other things, and I've got my oil pastels, which I'm going to mix together, create a mixed media landscape artwork. Should be a bit quirky and imaginative, probably quite bright in colour, I warn you now, but that'll make it more fun. Starting off, you need a piece of paper. Now you could go for an A4 size, I've gone for an A3. It's a little bit clumsy working with the oil pastels, so it's easy to go up and be a little bit bigger. Your paper needs to be about 240 GSM and well taped down, because it's going to get a bit wet with the inks as we play around with them. Then you're going to need your reference image, and you can use one of mine or you can use one of your own. It's completely up to you. It's learning a technique that can be applied to multiple different themes and subjects. So don't worry, take some risks and have a play. Next, you're going to need a charcoal pencil for doing the drawing and setting everything out. Then you're going to need some inks. Now the inks can be either the basic primaries, the red, blue and yellow. You can mix them to create your secondaries. The colours do not have to be exact to the picture that you're using for your inspiration. However, if you have got some that are closer, you might want to use them. I've got a few closer. For instance, I'm going to use this Winsor & Newton calligraphy ink for the sky, which I quite like generally. I've got a nice yellow here, which is a brilliant yellow. I thought would be quite good and fun for doing the reeds. I have a brown for my trees, and I have a green for my green bushy overgrown area of well gardened, obviously. I'm obviously going to bring in a little bit more yellow down here and bleed it into the green so I get some tonal mixes. To do this, you're going to need a brush. You could use a big wash brush if you wanted to, something like this. Or if you want something a little bit smaller and controlled, you could go for something like I have there. With the inks, you're going to find that the colours go a lot further. So to play around with the inks, I would recommend a spray bottle of water and a palette. That'll help you mix. Then once that's dried out and we've got the bare bones laid down, you're going to need your oil pastels. I have a set here of Faber-Castell. It's up to you who you want to use. You might want a knife to sharpen them to a point to get some detail, which can be handy for buildings. You're also going to need a stiff brush for that. Some baby oil is pretty good for using for the blending. And I've got a stick for doing some scratching in and revealing those layers of colour from the ink from the initial early stage. You don't have to use a stick, you can use anything that you can find around the house that's sharp and that will scratch through the layers of oil pastel. It's completely up to you where you want to go, be playful, experiment and see where it leads you. So let's get started. First of all, I need to do my drawing. Now, my paper was clean before I put my oil pastel box on it. Now it seems to be somewhat dirty, but it doesn't matter. We're going to put lots of colour on top of it, so don't worry too much. First of all, what you're looking at getting is that horizon line, which is roughly halfway up the page. Also, you should always be considering your aspect ratio. This is a little bit longer and thinner than my page, but I'm going to just let things flow off the edge a bit more. So I probably won't work right up to the edge with the initial oil pastel work. Then I'm going to get my building in, which is slightly off centre. It's going to be around here. Holding my charcoal pencil towards the end, getting in a rough sketch of how big that's going to be. Make that a little bit bigger because my paper's a lot bigger than the reference image. Then I've got my trees, which are going to be coming up over here. Okay, and you can see I'm just sketching in roughly where they're going to be. I've got then my grassland coming down, so there's a little bit of green underneath the church. Then I've got my long reeds. Then I've got my green section, which is kind of down here. And then I've got the top of the gate just coming in down here. I'm not spending a huge amount of time on this because a lot of it's going to get washed out when I do the the ink washes. But I'm just looking at where I want the boundaries of various colours to be. It'll make life easier if you do. go over that a little bit harder. You can see okay, let's go around with the rubber, just remove those initial thinking areas. Right there, I've got my rough idea where my signs are, how big areas are going to be. And that should be pretty good for the initial stage. Now it's clean and free from dust. We move on to the fun, quirky part. Right, so for the next stage, you're going to need your inks, your palette to work in, a brush, and a water spray bottle plus a water pot. Now, I would recommend working from the top down through the to the bottom. You don't need to put all your colours in your palette at the initial stage. You can work through that and create blending. It'll stay wet for a little while. If you are worried, you might want to pour them out and get them ready to go, but be careful because it's easy for them to blend into each other on the pot and get a bit muddy. So to start off with, add some blue. I'm going to take my water spray bottle and I'm going to spray the sky section. Now I'm going to try and be really careful and not go near where the buildings are. For the buildings, I'm going to grab my brush and I'm going to just brush the water around the buildings. Now it's not a problem if you do go over the buildings, we'll be able to go over it with the oil pastel, so don't worry too much. But you might find that if you want it to be really quite crisp white, you want it to not be wet. Do make sure your paper has a decent coverage of water. Then pick up your blue, brush it in. I'm going to spray it a little bit and you can push it around the surface like so. Now you can see that I've already got a dribble that's coming down. That's not a problem. I've got a piece of tissue. I'm going to just mop up through my picture, like so. You can leave areas of runs if you want to. You can spray the ink and get various different effects. You can tilt the board to get different effects. It's completely up to you. Now what I'm going to do is bring in the yellow section, which is just beneath it. Now I've got to be careful because if that blue hits the yellow, it's going to go very green. So I might just soften off the amount of water at the bottom of my picture. Depends, if I want it to all flow, you could do. You could just put it in. So I'm going to grab a little bit of the yellow. I've got a bit of blue on my brush and I'm just dotting some of that in. A little bit more green over here while my brush has got a bit of blue on it. Now I'm going to take some of my yellow and I'm going to just paint the yellow in like so. Being careful to create a boundary of paper between the two. You can see that the blue just seeped down here and I want the green to come down, so I'm going to spray a little bit of water on my yellow. I'm going to pick up a little bit of green, and this is just from my yellow mixing on my palette. It again. Create that green tone. I could dab in a bit of a different shade of green if I wanted to. I'm going to put in a little bit down here so I can see it there. I'm going to wash my brush out and grab a little bit more yellow for this section down here. And you can see the borders that I'm leaving. I'm going to bring in some yellow up here. Quite nice. I like the bleeds. It's up to you if you want the bleeds or don't. I'm going to work a little bit more yellow down around here. Just through my gate. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of brown, clean my brush, put a little bit of water in my fence, grab a little bit of browning and run it along the top. Now everything in my picture is going to run down because of the angle of my board is tilted and with a gravitational pull, so I know everything's going to fall down the page. But you might find if you've got your board that's flat, you don't quite have the same effect. Bring in a little bit of brown over here for my bushes. I think I'll dab in a little bit of brown just in a few of the green areas to make it interesting. Still very wet. I have to be careful about bleeding. And put a little bit in the house and on the horizon. Okay, just like so. Have a little bit more yellow in here. And I'm going to take the yellow up. Have a little bit of a bleed in a few places. Push my brown a little bit more. Out, sky, quite light lightning areas using a tissue. Looks quite well. Move it around and create tonal contrast. Personally, I think there needs to be a little bit more blue up here, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. Bit more blue into the upper atmosphere. Now my paper is getting pretty wet, so I need to stop in a moment. I'll let it dry out or it's just going to end up getting wrecked. Just smooth out some of that pigment and go a little bit darker in a few places. Build up some contrast. Right, so this is now dry and I'm going to work into it. You can see the paper's a little bit wet, the surface is uneven, but it'll be fine for this. It's oil pastels and it won't get that wet, so it can take it. I have got my oil pastel set here. I've got a stiff brush, a stick, and some baby oil as well that I'll be using in this process. Now to start off with, again I'm going to work from the sky down. I'm going to play around with the sky and start introducing the pastels and getting a feel for what happens with the colours as they work on top of the ink surface. You'll find that you can put down some oil pastel, like so, and build up some colours. Now this is a good place to start because you can get a feel for what happens. The idea is that you're trying to get a hybrid between having areas of ink and of oil pastels. You might find that you want to put down some oil pastel, as I've done here, that's darker, and then work in a little bit of light if you want to work out certain areas. So you can see there's a watermark around there, just even it down around the building, or you could make it darker. It's completely up to you. You can play around with it. Now the other thing you can do is obviously throughout this take a little bit of baby oil and you can pour that out onto a palette, or if you want to, depends on the nozzle, you can put some on a brush, and then you can start blending the oil pastels into each other. You can also blend the oil pastels out into the natural colour of the ink that stained the paper to get a smoother transition of shade and tone. You will find that you need to be a little bit stiff on your brush. You'll find you'll need to be a little bit harder on your brush just to get it to work into the paper, like so. Right, so now I'm going to get on and do the oil pastel work. You'll see that hopefully coming along. Change the pressure that you have on the oil pastels, bring it up and down. Consider using various different shades and try not to overwork areas. It's very easy to overwork areas. You can see there you've got this white trail. I'm going to just put that in with my white oil pastel, like so, and then work it out. It's so hard in certain places. I'm going to increase my blue tone because I want a little bit darker up here than I got with my inks. And I'm going to blend that out into the rest of the picture. I'm going to blend it out into the rest of the picture, as you'll see. Okay, move on up. You will find that your brush that you've just used for that baby oil needs cleaning. Take a rag, give it a clean, and a bit of soap and water as well to take off any of the blue, or you'll end up with cross-contamination as you work down through the picture. I'm going to take the brown and work up some of these trees. You could always put the blue down and then want the trees on top as well. Because you're working with the brown, it's stronger and slightly darker, you can get away with that. I'm going to take a bit of white. Now you can see my white's got a bit of cross-contamination, so I need to get a rag, clean off any of that blue, or I'll end up with a blue building. So I can get that white in there. And the sun's coming from the right. You can see that strong highlight on the pieces of the building that stick out that direction. I can soften down the tone on the roof, just up here. And I'm going to just put in a grey tone to exaggerate that sunlight and shadow. I need a little bit of shadow. So I'm taking my black and being quite bold. You might want to cut this into a shape that's easy to draw with, because you need this to be quite precise. orangey brown door. A little bit of lilac, shadowy tone. Build it up. Right, I'm going to put in some softer browns. Tree. And if I wanted to, I could get my stick and scratch out some highlights. You can take a stick and you can start scratching through areas and building up some really nice marks. This is a small pointed stick, so if you go for the other end, which is a little bit larger, you'll get more bold, grand marks. You can scratch through areas that maybe you've gone a little bit too dark, that you want to lighten up, or you can scratch through areas to generate the types of marks that represent the textures in the picture, such as grass, even ripples on water, things like that can be built up. It's quite nice on the wood grain. And maybe you want to increase your highlight on the top. Like so. You can see there. So you could also add some black on, as you can see I've done here, just to exaggerate some of the details, shadows, throw up some contrast. It can really make a wonderful oil pastel painting if you just push your contrast a bit further than you would normally do. Hopefully you've had fun, and I'll see you next week with a new class.